On today's World Insights, China and Europe in a serious pragmatic dialogue to common ground and interest in the pandemic and trade carry the day despite geopolitics.
And of course there will be pressure from outside, but the EU takes its own course.
And fashion houses in big trouble. A return to the catwalk despite the pandemic. Will it help get fashion back on its feet? An industry insider tells us.
Well, China has the ability to innovate very quickly.
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. We begin today's program with this year's China-EU high-level economic and trade dialogue, which is seen as candid and pragmatic by both sides. In a video meeting with his EU counterpart on Tuesday, Chinese Vice Premier Liu He called for China and the EU to work hand in hand toward economic recovery and multilateralism. The two sides are inching closer to sealing an investment deal that's been 7 years in the making. As the investment treaty talks reach a crucial point, Washington is watching closely amid a worsening trade war with China and all the other factors involving geopolitics. What does the China-EU investment treaty mean to the two mega markets as well as the global economy, and how will EU handle the worsening relations between China and the U.S.? What does that mean for Brussels and Beijing? Let's find out. More on the China-EU dialogue. We are joined in Beijing, HONGJIAN, Director of the European Studies from the China Institute of International Studies. Meanwhile, we also have in Brussels FRASER, Senior Advisor at the European Policy Center in Brussels. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen. The meeting came to an end following a series of meetings taking place between leaders from China and the European countries. Now, this time, bilateral investment have been thoroughly discussed, and it's expected to have some results in the near future. Mr. Cameron, what kind of prospects are we have?
I think the prospects have improved for a number of reasons. First, because of the pandemic, it's imperative that the European Union and China cooperate together. Secondly, I think, the trade war between the US and China is something that's detrimental to the global economy, and I think China really wants to have a deal with the EU to show that it is committed to a multilateral system. And thirdly, I think it's in the interest of both the EU and China to up their game. There are so many areas where we can and should be working together in the trade and investment field. And I think the talks yesterday were a positive signal that we should be moving towards an agreement in the second half of this year.
As of the end of 2018, the EU's total investment in China reached over $130 billion, making it China's third largest source of investment. At the same time, China's direct investment in the EU countries has been declining, though, for the past 3 consecutive years. If you look at these numbers, certainly that shows a trend. Some say it's quite worrisome. Mr. Cui, from China's perspective, a bilateral investment agreement, and looking at these numbers, can we expect anything soon?
Bilateral investment agreement, I think now it shows a very big importance for firstly promoting the confidence with each other, between China and the EU. If we look at the number of the investment for both two sides, we can find in recent years, yes, China tried to promote its investment in Europe. But in recent years, especially from the 17, 18, or 19, we can find out that there are more and more, the sensitive or censorship mechanism from some member states, and even on the level of the European Union. I think it gives some negative impact on this confidence from especially Chinese investors towards the European market. So I think that's the importance that we could find as just like the European Union side mentioned that they like a kind of a reciprocal, treatment, and also any kind of a favorable policy environment. I think that now the investment agreement is trying to, find the way approach for both sides that firstly the fair and then reciprocal, treatment to each other.
Mr. Cameron, let me ask you a direct question. Can the EU countries as a whole be able to endure the political pressure coming out of Washington to, quote-unquote, decouple from China? Can the EU has its own sort of judgment in terms of what approach to take with China and do it accordingly?
The simple answer is yes. The EU looks after its own interests, and this has been shown time and time again. There's pressure from the US, there's pressure from China, from other countries, but essentially what the role of the European institutions is to do is to look at the combined interests of all the 27 member states and make a judgment on what is the best common interest. And that's exactly what they've been doing in the negotiations with China. And of course, there will be pressure from outside, but the EU takes its own course.
Would the EU countries be able to achieve consensus? As we know, some members are closer to Washington, others are not necessarily so. Some have some issues, others feel totally safe. Very different situations.
Well, in trade policy, there is a united front. The European Commission has a sovereign right to negotiate trade agreements and is in the lead on this. Obviously, it consults with all the member states, but as regards the progress in the Comprehensive Investment Agreement, there is broad agreement throughout the 27. We should be aiming for a successful and wide-ranging agreement. I think the talks yesterday demonstrated this. There was good progress on a level playing field. There's now going to be further work on market access, on sustainable development, and there will be a follow-up meeting at a summit level between the President of the Commission, the Council, plus Chancellor Merkel, with Xi Jinping on the 14th of September. So I think that's a good timetable.
Yes. Mr. Cui, on those issues, will China and the EU be able to find some common grounds, ranging from IPR to the so-called reciprocity to various kinds of factors that might have an impact on the economic and technological policies? Will China be able to step forward and say, on these issues, we're going to do what? And what about you in the EU? What are you going to do?
If we look at this negotiation process so far, we can find on some technical issues, both sides, China and EU, they achieved a lot of consensus. But now maybe on some core issues, including some, for example, the big consensus from the European side on China about the state-owned companies, the subsidies issue, and also public procurement issue and some other. So I think that now, yes, it becomes some barriers for this negotiation. But I think now for China, it's also a big test case. That how could China to make some more confidence to push forward its reform and opening up? But of course, I think from on the European side, especially from China's perspective, we need to understand what's the difference between the reciprocity and all the similarity. Because I think that now we should be careful once it touches some issue of systemic or some even political system. I don't think it's a smart way for European side try to find a more political, economic, explanation about any efforts from European side. Because I think from China's perspective, the investment agreement, indeed, it looks for some more commonality, but not just a game of that China should follow everything from a European side.
Mr. Cameron, your comments.
The name of the game will be reciprocity. Essentially, the EU is saying, look, you want to invest here and your companies have a green light. We want a similar green light in China. So that's the bottom line. And I think yesterday there was considerable progress on this move towards a level playing field. There still has to be some further progress on market access, particularly financial services, agriculture, and so on. But I think we're moving in the right direction, and that's important. And at the same time, it's not just about the comprehensive investment agreement. There are very good talks, I understand, also in terms of regulatory alignment, in terms of how we deal with other issues, including dealing with debt relief, dealing with the international role of the RMB and the euro. So we are moving beyond just the narrow scope of the investment talks to have a much wider, comprehensive economic relationship.
I have to ask you, Mr. Cameron, how will the EU countries be free from some ideological pressure coming either out of Washington or in some capitals within the EU countries, trying to shape either the bilateral investment treaty or other international cooperation between China and the EU with ideologies, with politics, with geopolitics? That's probably the EU countries have to answer China about, and also build confidence in China about the EU.
Well, you'll find that very few European countries, and certainly not the EU institutions, are following the US line. They're not looking at this in an ideological war. Nobody's talking about a new Cold War in Europe. They're wanting to, as I say, protect European interests. And many, I guess, are now waiting to see what will be the outcome of the US election just in a few months' time, and we might see a shift in American policy. So in no way is the EU position beholden to the ideological statements coming out of the current administration in Washington.
COVID-19 cases, if you look at it worldwide, have surpassed already 16 million and nearly 650,000 deaths. The global surge in COVID-19 cases is mainly driven by intense transmission in the relatively few countries. China and the EU countries appear to have contained the virus so far. So, which means there is a possibility of cooperation, and there is a possibility of these economies waking up first and try to set the stage for all the others who might follow later. So now that is quite a historical task if you look at it from afar. Mr. Cameron, how do you think China and the EU will be able to grasp this opportunity, particularly on the international stage, which you emphasized once and again earlier?
Well, the EU was critical, for example, of the US decision to withdraw from the WHO. The EU has said there must be a global effort here involving China, both to develop a vaccine and to ensure that its treatment is worldwide, and it's not, just one country that hoards any sort of breakthrough. That's a common position, I think, shared by the EU and China. I think, too, there must be, going forward, a much deeper analysis of global health issues. And here, again, the EU and China should be playing a leading role in terms of how to ensure that we have a properly funded international body, perhaps a reformed WHO, that can ensure that we mitigate against any further pandemics. Because, I mean, the hit to the global economy has been enormous, as you just said, and we have to try and ensure that this is not repeated.
Mr. Cui from China, your thoughts about that? In the international context, how much common ground China and the EU could have, and in fact, make sure they are grounded, not just talk about it, grounded before even the US election?
I think that firstly, China and the EU, we need to continue some existing cooperation. And just like you mentioned, not just only talk, and also we need to have some more actions. And indeed, that how about the synergy between the BRI and the connectivity between Europe and Asia proposed from the European Union side. And also, I think now it will give some very fresh meaning to this connectivity issue after the pandemic or in the pandemic. And secondly, I think that yes, China and the EU, we should find some more, new fields for cooperation. Especially, we need to find out more coordination on this, strategy and also economic policies. For example, how about the green industry and also digital industry? Now it has been, set by the European Union side as its a major industry strategy in next 7 or 10 years.
Yes, indeed. We need to see the lower hanging fruits, in fact. That's very crucial at a time of a pandemic and crisis. And Mr. Cameron, about that, what kind of lower hanging fruits can we have?
I think what Professor Xi said is right. I mean, the Green Deal is going to be hugely important for Europe and China going forward. And there are some voices saying that because of the COVID pandemic, we can't pay so much attention to the investment into green technology. I think that's wrong. I think it's really important to seize the opportunity to move forward to a different type of energy-based economy, both in Europe and in China. I think public opinion would support that. And so this is one, I think, low-hanging fruit where the two sides can cooperate and also put pressure on the US and other countries in the world to ensure that they live up to the Paris climate change commitment.
If you look at what's going on between China and the EU over the past few months, actually very active despite of the pandemic. Leaders of China and the EU have maintained close communication since the outbreak of corona pandemic. On June the 22nd, for example, first summit took place between the new EU leadership team and China's President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Keqiang. Chinese officials have also met virtually with their German and French counterparts, foreign ministers, for example, earlier this month, covering a wide range of topics from climate change and biodiversity to agriculture and nuclear power, and the list goes on. But the question once again is, how efficient will this relationship develop? And will that be able to brave the storm of geopolitics to make sure some grounded projects really going on and it's going to benefit the peoples of both sides? That's the key, isn't it, Mr. Cui?
Yes, I think now we need to find out more way for the China and the EU to narrow down the gap between the government-to-government cooperation and the people-to-people contact. Even now, as we know that this year, not only because of a pandemic and also because of the tension between China and the US, I think that now it's maybe it's a very important time now for China and the EU. We need to find out the very pragmatic approach to help the mutual understanding for peoples.
Mr. Cameron, let me put a fundamental question to you. Now, observing from Brussels, I'm sure you have already seen so many things happen between China and the United States just over the past 1 month or two. There was a trade war, quote unquote, and then it developed into a geopolitical, now even an ideological war rhetoric out of Washington or China. Some were even claiming the engaging China policy was a total failure, even though that was very much criticized inside the United States. But people are worried, Mr. Cameron, that there even be accidents on the South China Sea that could be spiraling out of control. So when EU think about relation with China in a strategic way, how do you look at the best scenarios and the worst scenarios that another capital might impact on this relationship?
Well, the Trump administration is pretty unpredictable, and before most elections in the US, there's always a bit of China bashing that goes on, and this time it's been ratcheted up, particularly by Secretary Pompeo and his speech last week in California. But if you look at the speech, there's very little actually policy. It's just rhetoric. And therefore, as I said, the EU is essentially now in a waiting mode to see and hope that the Biden administration would come in and change the tone.
Now, Mr. Cui, final question to you, also about that context, the worst-case scenario and the possibility that from WHO and WTO, China can work with other partners in this international context, rather than focusing on these kinds of ideological rhetorics and so-called bilateral action and also reaction.
Firstly, we need to go back to a more pragmatic way. I mean, we need to have more wisdom to transfer some ideological and political issue into a more technical issue. For example, just like we take the case of the BIT negotiation. Secondly, I think that for China and EU, especially, we need to find out more the actions to implement the multilateral cooperation. Even now, as we know, there's still some suspicions from European side on China that China will be loyal to multilateralism or not. And the third is, how could we try to work together, I mean, especially for China and EU, to produce more and more achievements. And then we need to try to keep attractivities to United States, especially if we look at the American politics after this November.
I want to thank the two of you, HONGJIAN and FRASER Cameron, helping us to understand your own perspective. All the best. Be safe. Thank you. You're watching World Insight. Coming up on our program, fashion houses in big trouble. A return to the catwalk despite the pandemic. Will it help get fashion back on its feet? An industry insider tells us about that, and also potential of China's fashion. Back with you in a few minutes.
We don't buy things purely for need. We buy things because we want them. We want to feel special.
Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight. Uncertainty grips industries, no thanks to the coronavirus pandemic. A sudden halt of consumer appetite means little or no demand, which forced many to close shops. As one of the most affected industries, the fashion world is preparing for a reboot. Fashion weeks and various events have been cancelled or postponed over the past few months. Design houses are facing an uphill struggle putting together their upcoming collections while reeling from significant losses. So how can the fashion industry survive the pandemic? Earlier, I spoke with Simon Collins, a fashion guru and an educator. Here are some of his thoughts. And I'm joined by Simon Collins, founder of We Design and the ex-dean of fashion school from Parsons, the new school of design. What a pleasure seeing you, sir, Mr. Collins.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I've always been wondering about how the fashion world people are surviving and thriving during the pandemic. Looking at you and the backdrop you have, I probably have an idea already.
Well, you know, the pandemic may do lots of things, but it doesn't stop you caring about fashion. If it's inside you, then it's inside you, and you really can't control it.
That's very true, what you just said. I will remember that. Having said that, though, we see fashion and the idea of fashion might be evolving as people are dealing with public health issues. I just want to throw you with a minor example of myself. I don't have to prepare too many fancy pants. I can just sit in front of Zoom every day and talking to people. So how is the fashion world evolving as a result of consumers' needs?
Well, you know, the French have a saying, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose, which means the more things change, the more they stay the same. The fact is, everything has changed now in fashion. Everything has changed. And yet, we still want to look great. We still want to buy clothes. We still want things because that's the nature of who we are. You know, we don't buy things purely for need. We buy things because we want them. We want to feel special. You know, fashion's about communication, and we want to communicate who we are with what we wear. And so, certainly, the pandemic has changed attitudes. The fashion world is completely different, but also still the same.
What are the differences? That's very interesting. How do you, as a guru in fashion world, how do you look at that, the differences?
Well, I think that there's a little bit less room for frivolity right now. You know, we don't have the same disposable income that we had before, and we're a little bit more aware of the fragility of life. And so perhaps we're taking things a little bit more seriously, but I don't think that's going to change us long term. On the industry side, things are different. You know, the fact is the industry has been functioning much the same way as it had been for more than 100 years. You can't go on like that indefinitely.
There are a lot of things going on all at the same time. You might say it does not have a direct impact on the fashion world, but it does have an impact. For example, you know, the future changes of global supply chains, the technologies and its impact on either the platform to interact about fashion and sell to consumers, or about fabrics, about the way to continue with the fashion development and also innovation. You also have very different cultures now trying to celebrate them, but at the same time somewhat globalized. So all of these are changing. And also people's way of looking at what is beautiful might be changing too as a result of public health issues. People like the glamour, but these days, many of us like something much closer to the world, to the nature. So, Mr. Collins, there are a lot of ideas change as a result of the mega trends, as we say.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there are three core elements that are changing, and everyone must embrace them, whether they even realize it or not. And those three elements are sustainability. There's no question about it. The world has to embrace sustainability, and the smart countries, the smart people, the smart brands, they are embracing it. Technology. Technology enables us to do things like sustainability. And any company that's not embracing technology, it's beyond me why they would not be doing that. And finally, diversity. And by diversity, I mean, of course, the simple concept of diversity, but I think more than that, caring for our communities, caring for people. I actually think that China has a distinct advantage here as well.
Tell me more about that.
Well, China has the ability to innovate very quickly. I would say quicker than any other country that I've worked in. And so I think when a good idea comes up, it may be Chinese, it may be from some other parts of the world, but when a good idea comes up, China has this incredible ability to innovate and respond quickly. And of course, we have the logistics in China to make big things happen very quickly. And I think that's a significant advantage when it comes to adjusting to the inevitable onslaught of sustainability. Which, I mean, that's why I spend so much time working in China, because I'm inspired by what's going on.
Tell me more about what inspired you and why is it important for an artist and also an educator, a fashion guru like you, to work with some of the most dynamic market. What is feeding you? What kinds of information? What kind of inspiration? Meanwhile, what are you providing also during this process?
Yeah, see, I can't do things that I don't believe in. You know, I'm too old to waste my time banging my head against the wall.
You're not old
at all,
places, but
I was pushing for a compliment there. No, but I can't waste my time. And so I go to China, I work in China because I feel the energy there. I feel the enthusiasm for learning. And yeah, lots of other countries have enthusiasm, but not at the same scale.
So a lot of things also going on in the world of fashion in China. We see designers that are becoming international. We also see designers that are more digging into the culture and tradition of China, trying to get inspirations. We also see designers, as you say, the Generation Z, it's almost the same as their counterparts anywhere else in the world. So how do you see this generational differences? Well, at the same time, the things that inspire these designers, how are you working with them about all of those factors?
Well, I found over the last 10 to 15 years teaching in China, it was very clear to me early on what the immense talent was, the young people and the talent that they have. And of course, now that everyone has every bit of information in the world on their phone, there's no lack of inspiration, you know. So I recognized that early on. But the challenge at the time was that Chinese industry was not really embracing the homegrown talent. And indeed, Chinese consumers were looking for Western brands. Now that's changed. If you go to one of the high-end luxury shopping malls in China, it used to be 90% Western. Now it's maybe 50% Western, which means 50% of it is domestic brands. Now that to me tells me the consumer is now much more interested in a domestic brand. Then you come to industry. And the industry used to only try to hire designers that were international. That's all they wanted. Now I think that's opening up.
What about the international market? How are they embracing the Chinese designers or, you know, designers in Asia with China as one of those important corners?
Yeah. Well, I wrote a book when I was at Parsons, and it was called 30 Parsons Designers.
Yes.
And I interviewed 30 most notable designers that have been through the school. A third of them were Asian, and most of them were Chinese. And they've been working in every design team around the world for years. But it's just, no one really talked about it. I remember, actually, the New York Times did an article on Asian designers when I was the dean at Parsons, and they interviewed me, and I said, look, we don't see color here. We just see students. We have no interest in where they're from, what nationality they are, what race or anything. We just see students. And so we weren't going to be drawn on was there a particular talent of Chinese designers. You know, I have to tell you, there's a there's a certain confidence in China that's been rising this past decade, and I feel like it's palpable in the students. You know, they recognize the value of their own culture, and they want to embrace that. They no longer feel the need to prove that they're Chinese, which I think is really good. It's really healthy. You don't have to prove you're Chinese. You already are. You know, your culture is within you. Your background already informs who you are as a designer. And when they bring that, I think Jason Wu is a great example. When they bring that design talent to their work, it doesn't have to look Chinese to be great Chinese design.
It's very interesting, that point, Mr. Collins, because you've been hearing this debate here in China and elsewhere in the world. What is the Chineseness, right? And whether that should be, quote-unquote, reflected in everything a Chinese designer or a Chinese contemporary artist is doing. So you do not, it seems, subscribe to that idea.
I definitely do not. You know, any more than Calvin Klein has to look American, Louis Vuitton has to look French, Prada has to look Italian. They don't. They look international. And if you want to be international, you've got to look international, right? It's okay if there are elements of Chinese culture in your work, and it's a beautiful thing. And there will be if you're Chinese. But you don't have to prove you're Chinese. And that's different to saying that you shouldn't use Chinese culture. Of course you should. You should embrace it, you should respect it, and you should enjoy it. And if it happens to be part of who you are as a designer, that's wonderful. I have nothing but respect for that. But you just don't have to prove it with everything. Because I remember 15 years ago teaching students, and they would say, I've done this collection, but I need to make it look more Chinese. And I would say, why? I don't understand why you have to do that.
What are some of the brands or some of the works, specific works or moments you most impressed or remember well about a designer coming from this part of the world, and something there in it that becomes an identity, but at the same time becomes a bridge?
There's a handful of designers who I know fairly well from China, who I've got the deepest respect for, and I love their work. Taorei Wang is one of them. Taorei, she studied internationally. She works in Shanghai. Her collection uses very beautiful international fabrics. It's all made in Shanghai, and it's of the very, very highest quality. It's absolutely beautiful. She shows on the New York runway, and it fits in seamlessly with international brands. Then you've got someone like Marcia Ma. And Marcia Ma also studied internationally, but felt very much like a Chinese designer. So she came back to Shanghai, she established her business in Shanghai. She shows in Paris, but she shows in Paris for business reasons. She's a Chinese designer. You know, then you've got Lu Yan. So Lu Yan's collection, Comme Moi. So Lu Yan is the famous supermodel. And again, she felt very much like a Chinese designer and wanted to, she realized what fashion is. She knows how to do it. And she wanted to do that in Shanghai. And so she does. And it's a beautiful example of what a collection can be. Grace Chen, another example. Grace, again, studied internationally, but has, you know, really a Chinese version of haute couture. And she does it from this beautiful mansion in Shanghai. So there are so many different elements of Chinese design that I think are world-class, every bit as good as anybody else in the world. I just think that we're working on getting people to respect that globally.
A lot of diversity you just mentioned, and it happens just many of them are my great friends. And I know, on a personal basis,
I hope I'm your great friend now.
yes, how hard they are working in order to bring out the identity of their brand to the public, and also how hard they want to serve as a bridge between China and the world, in fact, through their fashion works.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I do think that's a very critical element, and you know, never more so than right now today. Because I think that we, meaning the West and China, have so much in common. We have so much to learn from each other, so much to share with each other. There's so much richness and joy in working together and getting to know each other better. And I think those designers are great examples of that. I certainly try to do that with my work. You know, I love nothing more than being in China with my friends, learning about the culture, sharing my English background, my American work, you know, the other global elements of what I do. And I think that both parties become so much richer, so much happier through better knowledge and understanding of each other. And certainly in my work, one of the most critical things I'm trying to do is increase that awareness, be a bridge.
Mr. Collins, you know, we have seen a lot of new development in our world. earlier the Chinese brand, the Chinese designer, come onto the world stage with a sense of freshness, even a sense of exoticism, and a sense of diversity and vitality that goes with what the image of China is like for the rest of the world. Now, because I'm dealing with geopolitics every day in my work, through conversations with people around the world to talk about the pandemic, talk about the economy, you certainly have seen China's image has been evolving in people's eyes. That could be temporary. That could be for some time to come. So how do you see, the world of art, the world of fashion, also as a result being impacted or free from it?
I think I give a lot of speeches around the world, and one of the critical things I like to try and get across to people is it's not what you say, it's what people hear. And what I mean by that is, I can say it's hot today, because for me it's hot. To you, it might be quite cool, because if you're in Shanghai, it's 35 degrees, which is far, far hotter. So the point is, it's not what I say, it's what you're experiencing. So when a designer communicates something, what they think they're communicating might not be what the recipient is hearing or seeing. And so I think that with Chinese creativity, as I've said already, there is immense creativity. There's the most wonderful design work coming out of China. But it's not always necessarily understood by the wider world, which is a shame, and I recognize it, other people don't. And so I think one of the things that I've tried to do over the last decade is work with Chinese companies to help them to understand how to communicate with the rest of the world. It's not about changing what you do. The work that's done in China is beautiful and it doesn't have to change. The point is that sometimes you need to communicate in a slightly different way just to get your point across.
Mr. Collins, I know you've been involving in the American society with Asian Americans and with Chinese Americans. You've been hosting and supporting the China Gala, one of the biggest events of the year for the Chinese community in the United States. Many of the biggest names are there. So tell me more about how at this critical juncture, between China and the United States, and at this critical juncture of our world, do you think we could do together?
I think the China Gala is the most incredible example of the reality of the relationship between the US and China. We love each other. We just do. We're very close friends. We are intrinsically linked, business-wise, culturally, economically, in every conceivable way. Along the way, there's occasionally someone who tries to, create friction. We unfortunately have one in our country right now, but it doesn't matter. It will pass, and then we'll go back to remembering that we're friends again. And I think the China Gala is a great example of the best of our relationship. The Yusai Khan, who's an icon, Yusai Khan conceived of it, put it together. Her team do a spectacular job running it, supporting the China Institute here in the US. And it's my honor to be a goodwill ambassador for the China Institute and a good friend of Yusai, and to do what I can to help in the hosting. So, as I say, the whole thing celebrates the intrinsic links between our two great countries and gives an opportunity for people in the US to see the best of what's going on in China. For example, the first year we had Guopei doing her collection, which, I mean, Guopei, she's amazing. We had Grace Chen, we had Jason Wu last time. We've had so many wonderful people showing their collections. And it's just this one, it's one night, but it's a wonderful way of bringing together the people that really love the bonds between our two great nations, and celebrating that, and finding ways like, bringing somebody like me in that already had a passion for China, and now I have yet another reason to talk about it and to engage. So it's like one of those gifts that keeps on giving, and everybody wins.
Exactly. We need everybody to win, indeed, and to win it with beauty,
We do.
with the best fashion ever.
That's right. That's right. We have so much in common. We really do. And every time I go to China, I find more and more. And it never ceases to, one thing that drives me crazy is that people don't realize the creativity that goes on in China in the rest of the world. They think that China's a great workshop, it can manufacture, it can do these other things, but they don't realize the raw talent. And I like a fight. I like having a fight with people in the West when they say, well, China, does this. I'm like, you want to do that with me? I'll tell you what's going on there. And so, the China Gala is yet another example for me of the best of what's happening in China. And I can use that in my my arguments with people about the reality of what's going on.
You know, Mr. Collins, those are politically minded might be saying, oh, you are politically incorrect these days, you know. China is not anymore, you know, the most desired place because there are a lot of geopolitics. And they would warn you. What would you say?
I've spent enough time in China to feel like I have a good sense of what's going on. And quite honestly, I don't know which country should be casting the first stone right now, because I think every country has problems. And, you know, there are times when you look at certain countries and you think, wow, like New Zealand, for example. New Zealand is doing a wonderful job, and it seems to be a very, very desirable place to be. You know, some of the Scandinavian countries, the same thing. But, you know, for everybody else, we live in the real world. You know, our countries do good things, we do some things that are not quite so good. You know, I don't think anyone's really got the moral high ground at this point. You know, I don't love everything about any country, but, you know, I like a lot of things about China. I like a lot of things about the US. I guess I spend my days looking for the best in both countries, right?
Beautifully said. I would do that too, to look for the beautiful things in every country and make sure they can spread around.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Simon Collins, founder of We Design and also ex-dean of the fashion school, Parsons, the new school of design. Thank you so much, sir. All the best, and be a good host.
Thank you.
Simon Collins, a fashion guru and an educator, talking about his interactions with his Chinese counterparts. And that's all we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching. Bye for now.